Beautiful and strong people, welcome to the Bench Press Mastery, the place in which we're going to learn exactly how to become the best benchers we can actually be. We're going to go into the fundamentals of the bench press and how to improve our bench press step by step. The first lesson is going to be the setup. And through this lesson, I really want you to think about this analogy. You can't fire a cannon from a canoe. Let's take a moment to actually think about that. Why you can't really fire a cannon from a canoe? Well, a cannon is pretty much a weapon that's going to generate a lot of force, okay, because it pretty much has to propel a rocket, I don't know, freaking ball of fire, whatever may it be, as far away as possible to its target. So there is the force component. Now, can you fire a cannon from a canoe? The canoe is, first of all, very unstable. So the cannon requires stability, requires a really strong platform from which it actually stands. So it's not going to push back. Okay, just like when you're actually having a gun, okay, you need to really brace yourself to actually shoot. Else the gun will propel itself back. So this is pretty much very similar in the bench press. It's going to be very hard for us to actually generate force against the barbell if we do not have the stability on our setup. Okay, so this is where the setup and the process of actually setting up comes into play, and pretty much the objective of it. But let's take a look at why the setup really matters, because the setup really represents something like 80% of your bench. So if you're nailing down the setup component, 80% of your bench is already done. However, that 80% is not only through the setup process. You have to hold that through the entirety of the repetitions. Okay, so from the moment in which you're actually setting up, you're trying to get into position. From the moment in which you unrack, you want to hold the tension, you want to hold the setup. From the moment in which you're going through the repetitions, you want to hold that setup. We're going to learn how we're actually going to be able to actually achieve that. But let's take a look at why the setup really matters, and we don't just sit on the bench and grab the bar and just off we go. Okay, we want to intentively think about creating tension. We want to intentively think about creating the best possible mechanical advantage. That mechanical advantage is allowing us to shorten the range of motion. It's allowing us to actually have the shoulder blades in a really stable position from which our shoulders can actually press against the barbell. That not only helps with the force transfer, but it also helps to reduce the shoulder strain. Okay, so if we're having loosey-goosey shoulders, we may potentially have to make an appointment to our PT to do something about that. Okay, especially if we want to lift heavy, we want to have our shoulders as strong and stable into position. The other reason why the setup really matters is because through the setup, we're actually enabling the leg drive and the full body tension. Full body tension is key. And I want you to really conceptualize the idea of the cannon and the canoe. You need that strong platform from which you can actually launch the cannon. However, in the bench press, we can't just sit and think about, okay, I have a really strong platform. We have to create a strong platform from the full body tension. Okay, so from the leg drive, from intentively thinking about pushing back, from intently thinking about loading our lats, and so on. And of course, having a stable and strong setup is going to also allow you to actually have consistency rep by rep. If you're having the consistency, it's going to be very easy after that to actually stack the stimulus and get stronger. If you're not having the consistency and each repetition just looks absolutely different from the other, you're not really going to be able to actually find that sweet spot, that comfortable bar path, and so on. So let's take a look at the objectives. What should we be aiming for when we want to create a strong and stable setup? Well, first of all, we have to take a look at the upper back position. Okay, so we want to achieve an upper back position in which our scabs are retracted and depressed. Okay, that's allowing our shoulder blades to be in a strong and stable position. That's allowing us to actually have a really good connection with our lats. The lats, there is a debate in regards to how you're using the lats in the bench press. Many people would say that you're benching with your lats. I would disregard that idea that you're actually benching with your lats. You're actually using the lats to guide your humerus to be in a position in which you have the best mechanical advantage to make use of your pecs. Okay, so your lat is just like a tool that's actually helping your pecs to generate as much force as possible against the barbell. Okay, so a locked up upper body position is going to allow us to actually connect with our lats. It's going to actually have our shoulder blades as stable and as strong as possible. And of course, with that, we can generate a lot more force against the barbell. Now, the other component, of course, is the arch. Okay, so through this locked in upper back position, we're getting this beautiful arch that people like to disregard and just call it cheating. For IPF and IPF affiliated federations, indeed you can't really arch that much because of the elbow depth rule. But for the federations in which you're not having such a restriction, you can arch as much as possible in the bench press. So the arch is really allowing us to push more load because it shortens the range of motion, and it's also keeping the shoulders healthy. They're keeping the shoulders in our back pockets. They're keeping them stable, just like I actually described in the locked in upper back position. So it is a position that we want to achieve and we want to create as much as possible. Of course, the other thing that the other objective is to have the full point of contact. Okay, so we want to have our head, we want to have our shoulders and our glutes glued to the bench, and have our feet glued to the ground. For most federations, especially IPF affiliated federations, your head, shoulders, and glutes have to make contact with the bench. If your head or your glutes are lifting, okay, so any particular, let's say, movement from the setup is going to give you a red light. So you don't want to end up in that situation. I know there are some federations in which you can lift your head up. For most federations, that's not really a rule to actually strive for. So the setup is going to have the objective to make sure that all those points are assured. And the last objective is going to be the leg drive. Okay, you want a position in which you can actually enable the leg drive. You can actually drive back into your neck and hold as much tension into the setup as possible. Now we have to take a look at the equipment that we have. And some of you may potentially be blessed and train in a powerlifting specific gym. Some others may potentially not really have that luxury. We're going to go through the fundamentals, and after that we're going to touch upon a couple of let's say substitutes and workarounds for situations in which the bench is kind of subpar. Okay, so we want to make sure that the bench height ensures us to make full contact with the ground. Okay, if we cannot do that, the bench is either too high or we're too short, or both of those cases. If that's a problem, you can make use of some blocks, or just stack some plates to elevate your feet a little bit, and you're going to have an easier time after that setting up. We want to make sure that the bar position on the rack is towards the end of the J hook, towards the edge of the J hook, the lip of the J hook, because doing so is going to make the unrack a lot easier. We only need to think about pulling the bar out, or we don't really need to create that much distance from the J hook to the initial position. Because if we end up with our arms this far, okay, so we have pretty much the barbell somewhere around let's say forehead level, it's going to be very hard to actually do the unrack, first of all. Now, if you have a, let's say, a spotter, that shouldn't be much of a problem, but we still want to get into a position which we can actually wedge. Okay, so we do want to make sure that the bar is towards the edge of the J-hook, so we have an easier time to actually wedge under the bar and bring the bar out, or just pull the bar out from the hook. We want the J-hooks, in the same line. We kind of want the J-hooks to be in a position in which they're not too high, but not too low. Okay, we should be striving to have it somewhere around the position in which our elbows are slightly bent. Okay, this position really allows us to actually wedge under the bar. Okay, so really using the weight to actually push ourselves into the bench and have an easier time unracking. If, for example, you're in a situation in which the commercial gym doesn't really allow it, we're going to have a couple of cases and a couple of solutions for that. Okay, so the case number one would be having a slippery bench. Traction is key to a strong and stable bench. If you do not have the traction, you're going to go all over the place. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have the traction on the bench press, you have the traction on the floor. Okay, if the bench is slippery, you can use if the bench is slippery, you can make use of some bands. They're very cheap and you can just, grab them from anywhere you can find them. If the gym doesn't really have them, most of the gyms do have bands. Wrap them around the bench and you're going to have traction. Okay. The case number two would be having a thin bench, and I'm going to need to actually grab some water. So the case number two, thin bench. If you're a big individual or just the bench is absolutely shit and it's very thin, your scabs will be kind of in the air. So we need to do something about that. An easy way around that is to just put a yoga mat over the bench, wrap a band or a pair of bands around the bench, so the mat is actually hooked to the bench. If, for example, you're putting the mat and you're not putting the bands around it, you're not going to solve too much with traction, especially if the bench is actually slippery. Okay, so you're just going to slip with the mat. So you want to make sure that you're actually using the bands to really root the mat into the bench. So case number three would be J-hooks being too high. If you're a, let's say, short individual with short arms, or a lightweight female, and you're training in a commercial gym, most of the times you're finding yourself in such a situation. The J-hooks are either too high or too low. Okay, if they're too high, you can use some yoga mats. You can stack them. I know it's going to look silly, but if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. So you can pair some yoga mats to just give you a little bit more height, and from there have an easier time actually unracking. Now, if you do find yourself in a situation in which you're getting way too high on the bench press, that's going to get you in a situation in which you're training without the comp specificity. So you want to kind of emulate the position in which you would actually end up on a platform. Okay. For that, you can actually use blocks or plate underneath your feet, so you can get closer to the comp specificity, but you do want to take that under consideration if you're trying to actually elevate the height of your bench. Case number four, J-hooks are too low. Okay, you can wrap a wrist wrap or a strap around the J-hook to just elevate it slightly. It's a really easy fix. If your J-hook is too long, like this in this situation, again, strap, wrist wrap around the base of the hook this time, so you can actually pull the bar towards the edge of the J-hook, and you're going to have an easier time after that unracking. However, if the lip of the J-hook is too tall, so notice this one, this one is very steep, very tall. This one barely, there is barely any space in here. Okay, so these are two extremes. If you find yourself in such a situation, just like if the J-hook is too low, you can use a strap, wrist wrap around the J-hook to actually elevate the bar slightly up and have an easier time after that unracking. Now, if you find yourself in a situation in which the floor is slippery, well, there are two possibilities. You can either put a yoga mat underneath the bench, so you're actually having that rubbery material to really keep you rooted into the bench. Or if the flooring isn't really an issue, you can take a look at your shoes. Many of the shoes, especially if you're using running shoes, those are usually slippery. So you want to make sure that you're having some proper, shoeing. If you don't have, I would suggest you to actually get some grippy shoes. Notorious Lifts, for example, they have a lot of really grippy shoes and with white toe. So it's a recommendation that I can actually give you. And of course, if you have a squat rack, just bench there. Most of the squat racks actually have certain degrees of changing the height of the J hook. This is, for example, a power rack. So if you have a squat rack or a power rack, I would suggest you use that instead of a shitty bench. However, if you only have one squat rack in your gym, well, my friend, that's a complicated situation. You want to make sure that you're actually benching in, some days or some, hours in which people don't really squat, or else you're going to actually be seen as an asshole. So that's something to actually take under consideration. But if people don't usually squat in that place, you can just grab it and just do your spiel. Alrighty, so we're going to get into the step by step on how to set up like a powerlifter. The method that I'm going to teach you in this bench press mastery is going to be through a sliding motion. Now, this is just a method that I'm going to present, a method that I've been, using for a very long time, and I've seen great success not only on myself but on athletes also. That's not necessarily the method that we need to follow through the coaching process. I may potentially want you to use some different way of actually setting up based on your experience, based on your equipment, based on other factors. So this is just an idea and getting pretty much putting the fundamentals into one piece. Okay, so the first step, of course, is going to be to actually sit on the bench. Okay, but as you're actually sitting on the bench, we want to make sure that we're creating a little bit of space between ourselves and the bench and the barbell. Okay, so we can actually slide under and create that setup tension. Okay, so you want to make sure that the barbell is somewhere around eye level to forehead level, somewhere around there, so you're having that space to actually create through the sliding motion. Now, we're not going to intentively think about trying to squeeze the scaps. We're actually going to make use of the leg drive and through that sliding motion to get our scaps retracted and depressed into position. Now, key here is going to be to actually relax your traps. If you do not relax your traps and you're actually squeezing your traps, it's going to be very, very hard to get into position. Okay, so you're going to notice here as I'm actually going through the breathing process, okay, I'm going to push with my leg drive. Okay, I'm using that force to actually push back into my neck. But notice how my traps are actually getting relaxed. Okay, so right here, I'm thinking about creating a long neck. Okay, so I want to let my scap retract and depress into position. And through this process, I don't even need to actually focus on trying to create that position of my scaps. They automatically get into the desired position. Now, if you have trouble getting the feeling, the proprioception of how your scaps should actually be placed, you can actually make use of either the rack or the safeties to really shimmy your shoulder blades back and get that tightness feeling. So when you're actually sliding back, you kind of, have that feeling in mind and you know exactly what to actually capture through that sliding motion. As I said, we're going to make use of the leg drive to get our scaps retracted and depressed into position. I would suggest you to try to do that through a bridge position. Okay, so you're going to lift your hips up. You're going to drive through your toes. You can either, do that through your toes or, full foot. But you want to elevate your glutes a little bit so you have a better overall leverage to do the arm rack, first of all. And secondly, it actually aids into creating that extension that we actually want to achieve during the bench press. Okay, so it's going to help you to actually arch into position. As you can see, I'm really pushing hard. I'm using my legs to really drive that tension into my neck. And once I'm actually dropping, I'm grabbing the bar out of the hook. Okay, so I'm unracking the bar. You're going to notice that I'm not dropping the hips immediately down. Okay, I'm trying to capture as much of that extension as possible. I'm dropping the heels down and I'm trying to still drive back into my neck. Okay, in order to hold as much of that extension as possible through the drop of the hips, we want to think about pushing the hips back instead of actually dropping them. So I want you to imagine a Romanian deadlift. Okay, so through the Romanian deadlift, pretty much what you're doing is to actually hinge back. Okay, this is exactly what I want you to do when you're bringing the hips down. Okay, so you're not dropping the hips, because if you're just dropping the hips, the extension, the setup that you actually try to create is going to collapse. Okay, so you want to think about pushing the hips to the bench until they make full contact with the bench and hold onto the leg drive throughout the entirety of the lift. Okay, so you do not want to let go of the leg drive. You want to actually reinforce the leg drive once the hips are on the bench. Okay, in the next module, in the next lesson, we're going to talk about leg drive, but I really want you to think about benching as a full body plank and not a press. If we nail down the setup and we nail down the tension, the pressing part will just be something intuitively. You don't need to think about the pressing motion. If you nail down the setup, the pressing motion is the easy part of the lift. So I'm going to catch you on the next lesson.